Well, so let's start. Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to Biologically Speaking. I'm Sundaram, a co-founder of Biologically Speaking and a researcher from CSIR Institute of Genomics and Integrative Biology, New Delhi. We'll be moderating today's session. To those who are new to Biologically Speaking, we are an academic interest group. We host webinar series designed to showcase the global frontiers in biological research. Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to Biologically Speaking. I'm Sundaram, co-founder. Yeah, sorry for this disturbance. So to those who are new to Biologically Speaking, we are an academic interest group. We host a regular webinar series designed to showcase the global frontiers in biological research and give a free platform for dialogues between researchers placed across the different rungs of the academic ladder. For more information on our activities, do visit our website and do follow us on our social media handles to get regular updates. Before we kickstart today's session, a gentle reminder to a couple of housekeeping things. If you have any questions for the speaker, please enter in the Zoom chat box. Those who are watching on YouTube, please type your questions in the comment section, and we'll be moderating them as much as possible after the talk. We encourage the audience to directly talk to our speaker. Please feel free to tap the raise hand on Zoom. We'll allow you to connect directly with our speaker. Without further ado, let's dive into today's session. We are delighted to have Professor S.C.Lakhotia from Banaras Hindu University with us today. He needs no introduction in Indian academia. However, bearing in mind the global audience and by following the rituals of the moderator, I'll be taking this opportunity to briefly introduce him amongst our audience. Professor Subhash Chandra Lakhotia is an Indian cytogeneticist and a veteran Indian academic who is currently a distinguished professor of zoology and INSA senior scientist at Banaras Hindu University. His outstanding work has garnered him many accolades. To name a few, he's a fellow of Indian Academy of Sciences, National Academy of Sciences, and in recognition of his work, he has been awarded the highly coveted Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize by CSIR, the highest Indian science award. Very recently, he has been awarded the ACRB Distinguished Fellowship by Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Besides his academic contributions, he has also been instrumental in promoting Indian science globally and voices his opinions about different pressing issues, especially practicing science in India. Today, he will be sharing his thoughts on integrity and ethics in research publications. Once again, a warm welcome to you, Professor Lakhotia, at Biologically Speaking. Now the stage is yours. Over to you, Professor Lakhotia.
Thank you, Sundar. You can see my slides?
Yes, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay, I'll make it full screen. Thanks to Sundaram and the Biological Speaking platform for letting me share this my thoughts about integrity and ethics in research publications. This is a very important area that every researcher needs to understand and follow up certainly because as has been stated, for example, Confucius' famous statement, the strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home. Same way, the strength of science that we do, the research that we do, derives from the integrity with which we do it and we communicate it. So I'll try to share my views as to how one looks at it or what are the general principles of ethics and integrity in research publications. First, let's see what is research. Research involves systematic and creative investigations in any domain of knowledge. It can be philosophical, it can be materialistic issues, or anything in this universe that can be perceived by our senses. Anything that we study about get deeper is what we can call as research. It's not just for a degree, but it's more out of curiosity that we have. And as a result of the study that we do, we generate new knowledge. And this new knowledge has honors, the persons or the person who created that knowledge and the recipients with whom this is communicated. And the recipient can be fellow researchers, can be anybody at large in the world. Now, why has ethics become so important? Why we talk so much about ethics in recent times? But before getting into that, let me just say that in general, ethics is important in research and its communication, and its importance is increasing more and more in current times. Partly because the scope and depth of research are increasing exponentially. As we learn more, we have more academic institutions, we have more questions, and more people are engaged in research. And this is true of not only science, in every domain of knowledge, that the research scope and depth is increasing exponentially almost. And research activity has become highly competitive because of larger number, and because in academia, research output is taken as a measure of individual's accomplishment, and therefore, with limited posts, with promotions and so on, everywhere the research activity becomes more important, and that brings in competition, and this competition sometimes brings in unhealthy competition, and that's where the ethics becomes important. Translation research, in addition, has material benefits as well, and therefore one wants to get more and more benefit. And in this, let's understand philosophically that human nature tends to indulge in selfish activities, which can lead to loss of integrity and honesty, and therefore high social entropy. And this is where we need to worry about, and this is where following ethics and integrity becomes important. Because research is the search for the truth, and therefore research community evolved its own set of conduct rules to safeguard against unethical behavior of researchers, to avoid the cascading negative impact on professional and society. You see, this cascading is very important to understand, that when somebody discovers something new, that gets added to the total knowledge base that we have. And based on this, next set of people begin to ask further question. If this new knowledge that is shared or created, so to say, if it's based on unethical conduct, and therefore it may not be the real truth, it will have consequent cascading consequences, because everybody will believe what is stated, what is communicated. We take it with a trust, and if that is not followed properly, then everything that follows subsequently can get in the wrong direction. And therefore, the integrity becomes very important, as Warren Buffett had said. In looking for people to hire, look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, the other two will kill you. This is what happens when integrity is not there. Intelligence and energy can be used in the wrong direction. And that's what is dangerous. And that's where we have to make sure that what we find out, what we communicate, both have integrity and the general ethical conduct that is expected of researchers. Now, basic requirements for maintaining ethical conduct in research is it must be reliable, it must have integrity and objectivity, not that because I believe, therefore it's like this. It should have a rational basis to make the interpretation, to make the claim. It must be accurate and transparent. How it was done, why it was done, these things must be known to everyone who is a recipient of this new knowledge. Then the researcher must respect intellectual property of others, just as we think that if I discovered something, it's my intellectual property, I must equally respect someone else's intellectual property, and that must be properly attributed and acknowledged. We must do responsible publication and mentoring, because publication is the way we communicate with others, or by mentoring, by training other people, communicating what we think, why we think. This must be responsible so that they understand things in a proper context. Then when we do research, we have subjects of research, which can be human subject, animal subject, environmental issues, or something else, and we must protect their interests. We must protect. See, if doing something a damage environment, then it's not nice. It's not appropriate. Similarly, animal ethics come in, human ethics come in when we talk of lots of clinical trial or human surveys or something. Then the human rights are also to be taken care of. At many places in research communication, we come into confidentiality and anonymity. I'll talk about this when I talk about peer review and editorial responsibility. That's where this becomes important point to remember. Accountability and legality, we must be accountable because of two things. Firstly, research is funded by someone, mostly societal funds, public or private or governmental, and we have to be accountable financially. But more importantly, we must be accountable to the society to which we are communicating. And any legal aspects of doing this must be properly followed. And of course, research must be without any discrimination, and it must be a social responsibility, because when we create knowledge, our knowledge ultimately goes to improve the status of the society in which we live, and therefore a researcher has a social responsibility as well. And researcher has obligations, obligation to society, that, as I said, to honor the trust placed by others, because as researchers, we are considered that if we make a statement, others take it for granted that what we are speaking is the truth, and at least as far as I understood today. But if this is based on unethical considerations, then we are dishonoring the trust that people have placed on us. Obligation to oneself, to not violate the rational values and ethics. This is an important personal decision that everybody must take, that one has to be obliged because to self, because we are part of the society. And we must be accountable to society, since research is mostly funded by public money. And there is a general obligation to act in ways that serve the humanity, because ultimately the whole object in a society is that how each individual can contribute to a better life, better living in the social milieu. Now, in this particular case, generation, dissemination of new knowledge, the researcher is the owner of new knowledge. And the new knowledge needs to be shared with others who are the recipients, partly for self-satisfaction. Obviously, each one of us, when we have published something new, we feel very satisfied that, okay, this is something that I contributed. And partly the ego is satisfied that, yeah, this was my discovery. Then we share it as a social responsibility so that the society in general can get better knowledge, better informed. And thirdly, it can be for application wealth generation. For when we talk of applied research, that's where application wealth generation comes in. Although I am sure I do not need to remind it, but every basic research lies at the root of any application research, because unless we know the basics, its application remains a distant dream. So only the basic research and applied research have to go hand to hand together. In academic domain, research publications are the major mode of dissemination. That's what we will talk about, research publication. What are the ethics underlying the publication part? And this is what the destiny of a scientist is, as Arago had stated, to get to know, to discover, to publish. This is the destiny of a scientist. Of course, scientists can be replaced by researcher as well. Now, first thing when you talk of communication, our results, what we have discovered, then comes the authorship. Who are the owners? And authorship and publication is defined by a committee of publication ethics, or COPE, which is actually not a governmental organization. It's a group, a variety of editors of different journals come together and have made this committee. And that has defined certain guidelines as to who can be author. And I would suggest that every researcher must go to this website and read the guidelines for everyone. I mean, this website provides guidelines to researchers, to peer reviewers, to editors, to publishers. And this must be understood by everyone who is involved in the process. And according to this, it has defined that the right to be an author is based on at least one of the following: that is conception and or design of the work, somebody who conceived or designed the work. It can be theoretical work, it can be experimental work, it can be survey work, but somebody designs it. So that person has the right to be an author. Acquisition, analysis, and or interpretation of the data generated, collected during the work. This is the person who actually do the work. In most cases, in the current times, it's mostly the PhD students or postdoctoral students in science, at least, who acquire the data, analyze it, and interpret it. So they are entitled to the author. Then a third set of people who can be either of these two groups, or who are drafting, editing the work, or revising it critically, and thus contributing intellectually to important content. So any of them only are authorized to be authors. And in multi-author articles, what each author has contributed must be well defined. In fact, most journals today, when one submits the article, ask the definition of each author contribution so that one know that the authorship is ethically defined. So authorship, the order of authorship in multi-author paper often takes to reflect relative. This has been a convention that first name, second name, third name, as it comes in, becomes kind of part of the relative contribution of each person. And among these multi-author papers, one or more is typically identified as the first author, one or more as corresponding authors, and others, if any, they are as co-authors. In some large groups where there can be hundreds of authors, they have made a convention that they will list the names alphabetically with a note that all authors made equal contribution to the study and the publication. It depends on the convention that each group follows. And order of authorship should be a joint decision of all co-authors. It's not that just someone supervisor decides this has to be the order. It should be a joint and healthy understanding of each one of them. The corresponding author is responsible for communication with the journal during the manuscript submission, peer review, and publication process. And the corresponding author also ensures the journal's administrative requirements like providing details of authorship, who contributed what, ethics committee approvals, documentation related to clinical trials, collecting information on conflict of interest. All these issues remain corresponding authors' responsibility primarily. But names of corresponding author may come anywhere in the order as collectively agreed upon. It's not necessarily that it has to be always last author. The general convention these days is that corresponding author names are the last one. But if that's not necessary, it can be anywhere. Even the first author, third author in a 10-author papership can be corresponding author. So it depends how one agrees upon this. The first author are the ones who carried out bulk of the primary work that on the basis of the article to be published. And in such cases, it's mostly in the present case when we are talking of research students, PhD students, and postdoc, they typically become the first author because they carried out the actual bench work in experimental study or even in theoretical study. But an important point that we must remember is that in multi-author publication, each author should know specific contribution of all other authors. If I'm an author in a multi-author paper, I must know why others are authors as well. Not that somebody put my name and I don't care about it. No, it's my responsibility because if something goes wrong, each one has a responsibility. And just as each one can take credit of that communication, if something is wrong with that communication, then each author will have to share the responsibility. Now, there are some unethical authorships that we need to worry about, like unethical authorship. One is guest or honorary or gift authorship. When authorship is based exclusively on the expectation that the inclusion of someone who made no useful contribution to the study would improve the chance of the work. For example, somebody is well-known person in the given field, and if that name can be included, then maybe people will think this is a very good work and its acceptance can be improved. But that person may not have any contributed. And if that's so, that's what we'll call as guest or honorary or gift authorship. Or somebody may include your friend who may not have made any contribution, and your friend will do the same thing for you, so that each one has a number of publications more. And this is again unethical. Only if the author must fit in the 3 criteria defined earlier. Then there is the worst kind of authorship is surrogate authorship, which is what typically happens in plagiarized papers or in predatory journals, or when you need a publication but you can't write, you are not able to write something on your own, or you don't have anything. You ask someone to prepare a manuscript for you without any original data of one's own and give your name. Now that will be fabricated data. Plagiarized papers are typically, that's what published in predatory or bogus journals. And this has to be avoided at all counts. Then there is a ghost authorship where the person who participated in the research, data analysis, and writing manuscript are unethically excluded as authors because of some reason, not defined region. Somebody contributed, but then because they fall apart, that name is excluded. This is unethical. Another class of ghost authorship, which is not unethical, is that somebody may contribute to writing a paper as a professional writer, because now there are agencies who will help you write a paper on a payment basis, or some of your friend or senior colleague may help you write a paper on an honorary basis. Their names need not come as authors, but the help should be acknowledged. So although they contributed to the paper ultimately, but they are not part of the authorship, and this ghost authorship is not unethical. But somebody who contributed and then deliberately not included as author is unethical. Then in typical research, and especially in science, since authorship has to be transparent and requires accountability, it is improper to publish scientific articles anonymously or under different names. If I'm an author, my identity must be very clearly defined, not ambiguous. And that's where anonymous authorship is not generally, or it's not permitted in research communications. Now, one point, particularly for the students and young investigators or senior investigators, something that we must understand is, since bulk of the research work is carried out by PhD students. Now, who should be authors in the work when that is published? A typical confusion sometimes happens is that if something is published, can that be part of PhD thesis, or something that is submitted PhD thesis can be published? Will that become plagiarism? No, it doesn't. As long as the authorship is clearly defined as to who the authors are and what they have contributed, it is accepted. But then, there are two important things that we must remember. A research work is carried by a PhD student or a postdoc person and a supervisor, thesis supervisor or somebody. Now, is that person name mandated to be included? May not be necessarily, because the thesis supervisor may or may not include his or her name as an author, depending upon how much was his or her actual contribution to the research work and the manuscript. If the student had planned the work, the supervisor is only providing facilities and general directions and has been able to collect data, interpret data, and write it up, maybe supervisor can say, the supervisor need not be an author in that paper. The student, he is a scholar, can publish independently, or when a postdoc can publish independently. This is perfectly legitimate. But without supervisor's permission to publish it, can be unethical. Likewise, supervisor must not publish doctoral work of a student without the student's name. I mean, because sometimes it can happen that the student submitted thesis, finished, got the degree, went away, the work remained unpublished. And supervisor decides to publish it, but then student's name must be included in that. And students should normally be informed that, okay, this publication going on, and the student should also agree with this. But in any case, publishing without student's name is definitely unethical. Now, another thing that is happening very in recent times is that nearly many students in the lab become authors in all the papers that come out from that lab. Now, this can be valid if it's a multi-component study where each one had contributed something and the paper comes out together. But when it can be unethical is if the whole work is included in the thesis of a student, and the student gives a declaration, supervisor gives a declaration that the work embodied in that thesis is entirely done by the candidate. And if same thing is published with multiple authors, then this is unethical, because the question is then how can that work be entirely one student's, but there are other people who are authors. They can be supervisor, co-supervisor, maybe author, but not other students. If they have contributed really, then the student's thesis, it must clearly state that this part of the work, which is included in the thesis to make a story complete, it has been carried out by so and so. Once that is done, then yes, it's not unethical. But if this is not defined and the multiple names are kept in the publication coming out, that will become unethical. General responsibilities on authors are good record keeping and maintenance of data, and this must be done on a daily basis. This is something that is very often not practiced, but this is very important for two reasons. One, for troubleshooting. If something goes wrong, then you can go back to the data sheet, every day's work where things could have gone wrong. But Equally important is as an evidence that what you are publishing was actually done and the data were actually collected, not fabricated. The data must be original, not copied from somewhere else. Honesty, objectivity, and integrity in experimental design, data analysis, data interpretation, and reporting data, results, methods, and procedures, they must be without plagiarism, that the data must be original. You have, and that's where the first part, the good record keeping and maintenance data becomes important to ensure that the data are original and that you have followed all the ethical ways to analyze it. And then one important thing that I personally feel, although many people do not agree with this, that ideas must be openly shared, because that's where you get better ideas from others, and your ideas can sometimes be useful, and this is how the knowledge improves. Although some people say, no, unless it's published, I do not share my ideas. It's a user belief. But to me, it's a good practice to share the ideas openly. But we must have respect for intellectual property. Even if we share ideas, the other person must respect my intellectual property, not use that idea without giving the due credit to person who gave that idea. Or you read someone else's as a reviewer or as an editor or something, you are privy to something which is not yet published, you must respect that intellectual property. Or even if you are citing something, you are making a statement in a publication, if somebody else had made that statement earlier or that idea came from someone else, that's where we give the reference citations. And if you don't give, it can come into category of either typical text plagiarism or idea plagiarism. And that's what has to be avoided. We must also follow the copyright agreement. With the publisher who is publishing our work, there's a copyright, and depending on the nature of the copyright, we must make sure that we follow that agreement, because this is a legal requirement. Another important point that we should follow is that once you publish a material and somebody wants to make use of that, to reuse that material for example, reproduction of a table or a data or a figure, they want to use it in their reviews, they have to seek the permission of the author as well as publisher. But as an author, we should be ready to give that permission, provided they follow the right protocol of giving the due attribution to the original work that is from where the data is taken. But somebody says, no, I do not want this to be shared, may not be illegal, but will be unethical, because then you are depriving sharing of the knowledge in a proper way. Then there is a question of confidentiality between authors, peer reviewers, and journal, because till your manuscript gets published, it remains a confidential document. And there is a certain degree of confidentiality between them, which must be honored. And of course, what we publish, we must be responsible. Not that, okay, I publish and then I forget, I do not know what had happened. No, I remain responsible for my entire life or what has been published in my name. And this is another area, because sometimes great discoveries are made or important discoveries are made, and the researcher rush to press to announce the results. This may be unethical, because at the same time, our manuscripts is pending with a journal for publication. And most journals do not want that your results are publicly announced in journal media as a claim, because it has not yet been peer reviewed, not yet vetted. And therefore, this public announcement of new results must be done in consultation with the journal and its editorial office. Publications, we also need to follow certain ethical conventions. One, like we do not make multiple submissions to 2 different journals or more journals at the same time. One manuscript is to be considered only by one journal at one time, except when you place it on a preprint archive as a preprint. I'll come to this part later on. If that is submitted, that manuscript which has been published as a preprint can be submitted to a journal for publication. That's not multiple submission, because it's known that preprints are for public view and they are absolutely ethical. And then one can make to a journal. But then if you submit a manuscript to one journal, you cannot submit to another journal at the same time. Similarly, we do not make multiple publications of same set of data. That's what has been typically called as salami slicing. that you have one set of data which are based on one hypothesis and which come out with same interpretation, but a part of data is published in one paper, a part of data in another paper, and maybe third paper. Now, each one of them individually does not contribute anything, but together they would make contribution, and therefore they should not be split into just to increase the number of publications that one has. Sometimes journals ask us to suggest potential reviewers that as to who could be reviewer of your manuscript submitted. Now, these reviewers' name must be given with full responsibility that these reviewers are actual experts in the given area, not your friends, not your colleagues, not your students or supervisors. That should not happen. That's what we say, without any conflict of interest. But they should be real experts who can give unbiased opinion about the work that is to be given. If a paper is published and one notices an error, the author themselves can notice an error, or someone else can point it out that there's an error. It is the responsibility of the authors to make that correction. And that what kind of error it is or what kind of correction it is, I'll come to that part a little later. The other important responsibility of publication is that sometimes we describe a new material, a new process, or a new reagent for certain studies, which is published. Once it is published, it becomes ethical responsibility that someone else wants to make use of that material or that reagent for their research. We should be ready to share that. And of course, when they use it, they will use it with due attribution to you that, okay, this was provided by so and so. And this is an important component that we must follow always. And of course, error correction can lead to withdrawal or retraction. And this is again an ethical responsibility of the authors to honestly withdraw or retract a paper if there's something is discovered which was seriously wrong. The reviewers, editors, and publishers have their own ethical conventions, again defined by COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, as to what they should do and what they should not do. As a reviewer, if, for example, a manuscript, I'm invited to review a manuscript, and if I think that, okay, the authors, I may have some bias for or against those authors. If so, I must honestly report to the auditor that, look, I may not be able to review this manuscript because of this reason. And the editor then can take a decision whether to request you to continue to be a reviewer or to withdraw the invitation to be a reviewer. But this must be very clearly and ethically reported to the editor if there's any conflict of interest. Many reviewers are blind reviewers, where they can be double blind, they can be single blind. That is, the editors and reviewer know who the authors are, but the authors do not know, may know the editor, but certainly may not even know who the editor is, because if there's multi-editorial staff on that given journal, and the chief editor assigns it to one editor, you may not know who the editor is. And likewise, one may not know who the reviewer is. So the editor and reviewer has to also make sure that they do not share that information with the author directly at any time, even after the paper is published. If this has to maintain confidentiality, that must be maintained forever. And the editors and reviewers must also not indulge in idea plagiarism, because they are privy to an unpublished information, maybe a new idea, maybe a new interpretation. And if they are experts in the given field, they may be tempted to use that idea of yours. And that's what we call as idea plagiarism. And this they must not do. We know there have been cases where the submitted manuscript takes long time to get reviewed and rejected. And around same time, one of the reviewers or the editors may use that idea and publish something according to this has happened. And that's why this has become an important point that we must not indulge in idea plagiarism. And we must remember, publication of research output is a societal responsibility, and therefore it cannot be as a purely commercial activity. And that's where predatory journals or bogus journals are completely unethical, because they are publishing only to make money rather than to spread good knowledge. And that's what I said, that publication of such journals is unethical. And publishers, editors, and reviewers of all scholarly articles must be vigilant to avoid any possible unethical misconduct on their part or on part of the authors, because that's where the importance of peer review has actually become, that when there's a peer review or a review of your manuscript by experts in the field, the whole idea is that they not only look at your ways you have done the experiment properly done, or controls are proper, interpretation are proper, but also to check if there has been any possible unethical misconduct on part of the authors. So they have to be very vigilant about this step. Then an equally important point is good laboratory practices. Good practice and research study define how they are planned, performed, monitored, recorded, archived, and reported. These are very well defined system. Depending on each area, good laboratory practices can vary from discipline to discipline, and these are fairly well defined. But general things are that we must ensure quality assurance. We must generate trustworthy results. It must have a necessary requirement of replicates, necessary statistical power, and statistical analysis. And then based on that, we make the interpretation. So only when these are followed properly, they become useful for the improvement of knowledge. And this is where an important point is, everyone makes mistakes, but good research practices minimize such unconscious errors. Deliberate errors are, of course, unethical, but sometimes we can have unconscious error, and that's where good research practices become important to minimize such errors. As I said before, good practices include maintenance of lab records, including raw data, the first set of data that you directly collect on the bench, and then you arrange that in your systematic analysis of tables and graphs and so on. All these must be properly maintained. Collaboration authorship requires mutual respect, understanding, and agreement, because see, this is more of a social understanding, friendship that goes on, but it must have appropriate basis to be collaborators and to be authors. And of course, we must not do any idea or text plagiarism. We must unbiasedly record all observations. Because sometimes what happens is that we have an hypothesis and we expect results to happen like this. But some results may deviate from what is expected. And the one temptation that happens is, okay, we forget these observations, which is completely unethical. And that it has another important risk is that you miss something very significant finding because of what is happening unexpected is the one that is actually going to give you new ideas. If what you observe follows expected, you're not making a new discovery. Your discovery happens when you find something which are not expected. And therefore, one must record all observations, whether expected or not expected. And of course, we must adhere to safety and to all ethical guidelines. And of course, we must avoid duplicate publications and submissions. And that's where it's important that the laboratory and the system has a control, because trust is good. That's how the word goes on. But to ensure trust, we need control as well. Good research practices include planning of work, familiarity with methods to be used. The person who is actually carrying out, the supervisor who is planning the work, must be familiar with the method, not just because someone else has used it, therefore we should use it, and we do not know the methods. Then it can be a very dangerous situation. Replication experience is important. There must be sample replication, and there should be independent experimental replication. For example, if one is taking some quantitative measurement, you take the measurement on same sample 3-4 times to make sure that there's no error in observations or error in the instrument or something, some other condition. And the same sample must be independently prepared multiple times and again measured or examined. That's what will be mean by replication. Equipment, very often in today's scientific research, we use a variety of equipments, more and more high-end equipments which are completely automatic, but the user must be familiar with the underlying principle. You see, this becomes important, especially for young people who are working in a very high-end system where there are central facilities, so that you give your sample and someone examines your sample and gives you the result. You may not be directly able to handle the equipment yourself. You only prepare sample and you give the and you get the results. But you must be familiar with how the results are obtained. What are the underlying principles? It's not that somebody gave you and you do not know how it is, because only when you know the underlying principle, you can interpret your results, the result that you get from the facility, in a proper way and appropriate manner. You must be familiar with the equipment. You must read the manual so that you know do's and don'ts of what are the different controls, how they work. This is an important point, that equipment must be calibrated. Very often quantitative measurements we take, even say for example, simple spectrophotometer. If it is not calibrated, your results can go haywire completely. And so that calibration, or even a weighing balance, calibration is very important to make sure that when you say that you measure 1 milligram, it's actually not 1.1 milligram or 0.9 milligram. Because if the balance is not properly calibrated, you can get errors in your quantification. And then, of course, troubleshooting. If something goes wrong, either the equipment or your method, you must know what minimal thing that you can do to make sure that works till an engineer comes from, and that can take time. So simple corrective measures every user must be familiar with. Data collection recording, again, must have been done honestly and ethically and properly, as I said before. And we must do appropriate statistical analysis whenever we have quantitative data. It's not just to say, because in one case I got a value of 5, in another case I got a 7, therefore they're different. Whether that 5 and 7 has statistical power to be different, to be called different, must be done by using appropriate statistical tests. And of course, we must follow ethical guidelines at every step. Research misconduct includes idea and text plagiarism. These are defined as research misconduct. If you have done an idea plagiarism or text plagiarism, then this is a misconduct. Falsification of fabricated data or images. This has again become an important issue, especially in biomedical research, where there are large volumes of data and lots of images from different kinds of microscopy. And the software now allows us to manipulate these images and the data in the way we want. And unfortunately, this falsification, fabrication has become very common. In fact, there have been some very serious analysis which claim that almost 60 to 70% of published biomedical research is irreproducible, cannot be reproduced, because somebody or at some step or the other, there have been events of falsification or fabrication, and therefore we must make sure that this is not happening in our studies, because this can then result to subsequent cascading consequences for oneself and for the science in general. We must not violate the regulatory guidelines, whatever the guidelines are there in a given discipline, in a given country, in a given institution, they must be followed completely. Now, the other is particularly when we have a large data and somebody wants to look, I want to look at the original data, and we don't provide that original data, that's again a research misconduct. In fact, that's why in most of the omics data, like be it proteomics, be it genomics, RNomics, or other data where you have large-scale data, you are required to deposit them in repositories which anybody can see with a certain time gap or immediately that you can define. But that data must be provided. If you are not providing, then that is unethical or research misconduct. Inappropriate authorship is again research misconduct, that somebody was made an author, somebody was not made an author for wrong reasons. And this also includes something. What happens is we submit a manuscript, when it comes for revision or when it comes for proof corrections, we want to add or remove an author name. Addition of a new name can be justified if there's a revision required and somebody else joins to do the revision work, then yes. And so the authors can write to the editor and you can look at it. But removal of an author's name from the manuscript which was already submitted looks much more suspect and looks much more unethical, because then the question is why in the first place the name was given. So removal of authorship at a later stage is something that is can be part of misconduct. But addition of an author's name with due justification can be permitted. And of course, this other thing that very often happens is when we do some study, we come out with results, we do not agree with the previous result. Now, this can have the two consequences, or it can have, as well as it can have two regions. One of the reasons for not agreeing with the previous results that my results are novel. I'm finding something new which the previous people have mixed, and therefore that's fine. But it could be a result of fraud, either because the previous results were fraudulent, or what results I'm getting now is part of fabrication or something. And these are really bad. But if it's a novelty, then yes, that's where you make an important discovery. What happens if misconduct is identified? First and most important thing is you're exploiting the trust of other researchers, not only other researchers, but the society in general. Actually, this is what we saw during the COVID pandemic. Lots of people made lots of claims that they have done this, they have found out this cure for COVID, and so on and so forth. And many of them were misconduct, actually. And the result was public in general thinks scientific research is bad. And that's where we are giving out a very wrong signal to the society in large. And that's what is important, that this consequence of misconduct, of exploitation, therefore losing the trust, is one of the worst things that can happen. And because this can also derail subsequent research, that's what we call cascading effect. I make a claim, somebody else trusts me, goes ahead, and after 2 years or 3 years find, okay, this was something serious wrong, where that claim was wrong. And this can be really damaging. Now, once misconduct is established, reported and established, this report can happen, author themselves can report it, or someone else. For example, there are platforms like PubPeer and many others, where people keep on looking at, and if they find something wrong, they post it there publicly, and this can be then brought to the notice of the editors or the institutions, and then the authors have to explain this. So once this is reported and established, the action that can happen is authors can correct, authors can themselves define, okay, this was an error, and this is the correct statement. This is the most honorable way of doing corrections. If editors first ask the authors, and if they do not respond, they can express a concern in the next issue. They can write. There's a column that comes in the table of contents page, expression of concern, that they are concerned about what was published earlier in that journal. And this means that something is uncertain, and the authors and others have to be careful about that study. But if the damage or the error is something wrong, or something more, the misconduct is something more severe, then editor or authors can retract or withdraw that paper. Ideally, authors should withdraw that, but sometimes authors become adamant and they continue to claim that their work is very good and ethically correct. But if editor is not satisfied, then editor can declare that, okay, this paper stands withdrawn. It should not be cited. It should not be the data obtained or the results should, as if this was never published. But that doesn't happen because somebody always doesn't keep track of what has been withdrawn, and therefore keeps on citing this. And in fact, there have been some studies which have suggested that some papers which were withdrawn, they're cited more often after the withdrawal because others didn't know about it. And so this is something that can have, despite retraction and withdrawal, it can continue to have a damaging consequence. Then the editor or the publisher can report to the funding agencies and host institutions about the misconduct, which can result in disciplinary action. But worse than that is the stigma that goes on, because then a bad name for that set of authors or the corresponding author or the first author becomes a part of so-called, so to say, their life. And this has to be avoided at all counts. Conflict of interest, just to reiterate that point, is a situation in which someone's personal interests are opposed to that person's responsibilities to other people. And this can affect a fair decision because the outcome may have beneficial or adverse effect on the person taking the decision. And that's what one has to make sure. Now, most journals say that when you're publishing something, you have no conflict of interest in publication. What is the author's conflict of interest? That if you're publishing that, you get some money from from some industry which has funded your study and therefore they want you to make a publication, may not be ethical, may be ethical, but in other case, if that has some consequence for you, that should be clearly stated. That, okay, this was supported by a private agency or a business agency or something, and which can, which leaves a possibility of some results being not properly interpreted, or you may favor one interpretation over the other. And so this must be clarified. Okay, something is missing here. I'm sorry, the image has disappeared, but this is something that one can see on Creative Commons license, which are publicly available. This again, a kind of not governmental agencies, but a general agreement that what kind of papers can be cited, when they need to be cited, when the data can be reproduced, can be used by others, modified by others. So there are different kinds of licenses. I'm sorry that my image has somehow lost from here, so I'm not able to show that. But this Creative Commons license are provided that we honor the intellectual property of others, which is the creative output of our person's mind. And so it says that which information publicly available on internet, but cannot be used for commercial purpose, or which can be used by others, but you cannot reproduce their data. For example, a typical thing that happens unethically is that in many theses now, the research student takes an image from the internet published paper and puts it as part of the thesis illustration and says adapted from. Now, this is unethical. If you have to use that figure in your thesis or in your publication, you need to have permission from the author and from the publisher for reusing that. This is what Creative Commons license also tells us. There's something that you want to use, whether it has been published, where you can use it without permission, or the authors and the publishers retain the right so that you need their permission, and this should be followed. Now I come to a small part of research journals, because that's what becomes equally important in our communication part, because we need to share the new knowledge, and that's what happens in recent times through scholarly journals, which are published by academic institutions and societies typically. And research publications are the major mode of dissemination of the new research output. And because more and more researchers are there, there have been more and more journals being published. And this attracted commercial publishers who actually now take almost 90 to 99% of scholarly publications are commercial publishers. Initially, there were all these publications happened by academic institutions like universities or research institutions or academic societies. But now, most of them happen to be either on behalf of these academic institutions or independently by commercial publishers, which had some positive consequences, but also several negative consequences. And I'll talk a little more about the negative consequences that have happened because of commercial publications. But one important development that has happened in recent 1 or 2 decades is the habit of putting things on as preprints for a public view. And that's where what has become preprint archives or preprint servers, which are maintained by well-known institutions or government agencies. For example, in physics, maths, and computer science, there's an archive which has been much older. In bioscience, bioarchive, biomedical is a med archive, which are maintained, for example, bioarchive maintained by Koshkin Harvard Lab. So these have become very important components now, because they provide eternal free open access without any charge to author or to reader for publicly sharing. But this is important, unpeer reviewed manuscripts. Now, these are manuscripts just as you have prepared. You post them on these archives, and they become immediately available, typically in 1 day. For example, if I prepared finalized my manuscript today and I put it on bioarchive, by tomorrow morning or latest by day after tomorrow morning, if it is otherwise acceptable, it will be available for public viewing. And that public viewing is to anyone, not just to institutions who subscribe to this, or anybody has to pay charge for this, or to put my manuscript on the preprint archive, I need to pay. No, it's completely free. And one advantage of this preprint archive is that it ensures against idea plagiarism, because your manuscript, your ideas are already stated there, and anybody who comes with similar idea later on without referring to you, you can always claim that this is what was published by me, because preprint archives of a good quality keep a date on which they were published, and they also now provide a DOI number, digital object identifier number, which is unique number and which can be used also for citation. Preprint archive, what has been placed on preprint archive can also be cited now, and most journals accept those citations. And so because they ensure a claim for priority, safeguarding a cited plagiarism, and also facilitate. Now, this is another important point, that because you put them on preprint archive, which like the social media also have pages where people who read it can post their comments. So people who read it can give you good feedback, whether your idea is good or whether something in your excellent design, something missing or something else is missing. And this can be useful to the authors when they prepare the final manuscript for submission to a journal. The other thing that has happened with preprint archives now is the standard preprint archive or archive and so on, that many journals permit that you can directly submit from preprint archive to the journal, so you don't have to make two submissions. And many journals actually also look at preprint archives, and they can sometimes write to you that, okay, we are interested in this manuscript, you can submit it to us. But in this case, one has to be careful that predatory journals jump onto this preprint archives and ask you that you can submit. So you must make sure that when you get an invitation, must identify who the inviting agency is. Is it a good journal or one of the bogus journals? And that's what predatory journals are. Bial in 2007 or 8 coined the term predatory journals for journals that we call these are the predators, which have little or no peer review system and which are primarily focused on making money from the gullible authors' prey. Why authors are prey? Because sometimes authors are required to have a publication to do something. And therefore, the journals take money and will publish anything. And they will be able to see, the authors will say, okay, I have 2 papers or something. And that's what led to the predatory journals. And this has become a really bad situation now. There are a large number of journals which are making money on part of authors and publishing something which can be worse than garbage, because they publish anything for money. All right, again, my images have disappeared. I don't know why, what had happened. Okay, let me go back to this. That Integrated Partnership recently published a report in March 2022, how to combat predatory journals. And this report is publicly available. Anybody can see. I apologize for my, I don't know what had happened. The images have disappeared suddenly. But this report provides that there is it's not possible to define that this journal is predatory or this journal is good. It's a complete spectrum of very bad to good quality, not so good quality and poor quality. And they have defined a set of criteria by which one can identify by visiting the website of a journal and see whether that journal is something that you would want to publish in or you do not want to publish in. Now, why predatory journals flourish? Because of increasing commercial of research publication, because now it has become a profit-making industry. And in fact, it's remarkable that publishing research journal is the highest profit-making, because mega publishers like Elsevier or Springer, they make huge profit, 30 to 40% profit, which is no industry gives it generally that level of profit. And this is where it has brought in many bad practices. And partly because our assessment system defines quality and quantity is more important than quality. And therefore, how many papers I have? 10 papers is better than 9 papers, which is better than 8, without bothering for the quality. And the other thing is, because we got used to open access charges, that because my journal is behind a paywall, because it's not subscribers or somebody to read it, so I will pay some charges to make it readable, or for the reader to pay charges to read it. This has become a source of income for publishers, and therefore predatory journals find it very convenient to charge to publish your journal, to your article. And unfortunately, now there are preprint servers, because preprints are becoming popular. So then now agency that say, okay, we'll publish a preprint for a money. Now, any such server is not good. Anybody that charges money for putting a preprint will disappear tomorrow. Your preprint is, you submit, pay money, you see it tomorrow, and then a day later, that website is gone. And unfortunately, likewise, we have predatory conferences and predatory awards. Conferences, you pay registration fee, you get a certificate, neither the conference is held, nor you participate. Awards, you pay certain money and you get a so-called award. Now, all these are something that has happened and that must be avoided completely. And that's what I was meaning about predatory award, that lots of non-profit NGOs request CV with a lucrative message that the recipient is shortlisted, selected for a prestigious award, and invite the recipient to become a member of a given organization by paying a hefty membership fee, and then you get an award, which is absolutely useless. So one has to be very careful about not falling prey to such situations. Now, how do we select a journal for submission of new manuscript? We must make sure that the journal has appropriate credibility and reputation. It is likely to be read by fellow workers. That means this should be a journal which fits my area so that others who work in similar area are likely to look at this journal. Now, then, of course, depends on the nature of manuscript, whether it's a review, it's a long or short research article, it's a letter or a commentary, because each journal publishes different kinds of articles accordingly. And then what's the previous history of publication, how much time it takes. If it's published very rapidly, one has to worry about. If it takes too long a time, again, one has to worry about. So that's where more journals now provide the date of submission, date of acceptance, and date of publication. If the gap is too short or too long, then yes, one will have to worry about. And prefer peer-reviewed journals published by established academies, learned societies, and universities, rather than stand-on commercial journals. That's what I would prefer, and that's what many people suggest, that we should publish in journals published by academic institutions. And we should not differentiate between so-called national and international journals. Like in India, we have a national journal and international journal. To me, and to many others, this is a wrong practice. A journal is a journal. It's visible international boundaries across the world today in internet era, and therefore, only thing is quality that is matters rather than the geographical location of the journal. And avoid open access charges, share PDF file. This is something very important. Most people now think that sharing PDF file is violating copyright rules. No. Once a paper is published, author must get a PDF file from the publisher, or one can create a PDF file from the hard copy, and that can be shared through email without any cost. And this is what I think we should practice instead of paying open access charges and losing enormous money. And avoid journals that invite also for rapid publication through aggressive mails. These are typical predatory journals. I mark such emails as spam so that I don't get it in my inbox. But if many people do that, then the email system itself will put these such mails in spam box, and people will not fall prey to such situations. And that's what I said. Why pay open access charges? Because you can share your PDF file through this thing, and that therefore there's no such thing to worry about, that my paper is not accessible to others. And then, of course, this is something that I would always say, that we need to promote good journals in India, publish quality papers also in journals published in India, which have good peer review and good quality publication policies. There are many, but do not publish in predatory or bogus journals. And say no to publication charges, especially the open access charges. As a policy, I do not publish in any journal which has publication charges, even paid charges. No, I will not. I'll publish in journals that are that I don't need to pay, and the reader doesn't need to pay for open access. And that's something that we need to maintain. Because as everyone believes, traditional quality journals in India is a must for our leadership in science. And unfortunately, that's not happening. And this is something that we need to worry about. So, okay, I'll quickly finish. And what I will say is, again, So the image is missing of this book, but it's a book on ethics and responsibilities, which are Indian National Science Academy web page. It's a free book, anybody can read it. And what I will just say is, quality research requires passion, not passion or compulsion, and major advance occurs only when ethically obtained results do not agree with the expected one. And so that's where I'll stop. And thank you all for listening. And if time permits, I'll be happy to take questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Lakhotia, for this enlightening talk and for touching upon the vast array of aspects regarding academic publishing and share with our audience. So if you allow me, then I'll go to the questions and answer session. So I can see there are lots of questions. So if you allow me, then I'll start the question.
Yes, I'll be happy. I'm sorry I took a little longer than what I thought I should, but I hope there'll be time for questions.
Thank you. So I'll just go to the question. So one question I can see from Deepak Poria. He's saying that thanks, Prof.
Just one moment, please. Hello. मैं घर पे ही मैं ऊपर में तो बैठा मेरी ऑनलाइन टॉक चल रही है तो बेटा मैं क्या करने को नहीं आ पाऊंगा बात ले लो या ले लो देख लो ठीक है I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So this is a question from Deepak Poria. He's saying that he's curious to know, in your opinion, what might be some of the causes for increasing numbers of deliberate unethical practices in scientific publications recently. And he's saying that maybe if we could figure out some of the root causes will help us to prevent these to happen. And also he has a question, another question in his mind. Is there any evolutionary principle like any selective or perceived advantages known to be acting in evolution, which might influence these increasing deliberate unethical practices in scientific publication?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, but I'll answer it in a slightly different manner. I'm sure each one of us is familiar with the laws of thermodynamics, that the energy is certain level that is maintained, and if if energy input is not there, things go to ground state. And I take it philosophically that our habits, our behavior also follow the same principle. And if we do not follow ethics, which is kind of input energy, our behavior will follow to ground state, which is of unethical conduct. And that's one of the reasons I think that happens, because again, one can say in evolution, we know survival of the fittest. And fittest, there's no ethics in that. You see, that's what we say, human society evolved ethics. But let's remember, as a student of animal science, I know that even animal societies have their own ethics, that they follow their own rules, and they have also punishments. The same is true with human society. And that's why we have ethics, rules, and morality. There are three things that we must remember. But the important point is, being in research, being in an academic environment, we must remember that we are in a profession which is supposed to be the best profession. And therefore, it involves certain responsibilities to be good, to work good, and to contribute to society. And so why people become unethical? Partly because they are not committed to academic standards. Second is the lure of material gains. I will get promotion because I can do better. And partly this has been manipulated by commercial interests, because we develop quantitative parameters, how many papers you have published. And the worst other thing that has happened is impact factor. The general impact factor that, okay, you need to publish in high impact factor journal. And remember, high impact factor publication requires more money. And there's also some data to indicate that more papers are retracted from high impact factor journals because they had unethical practices, because the authors were in a rush to publish something, and therefore they use that, and that's what led to it. So I personally would never worry about a general impact factor, but I would really worry about the quality. And therefore, the rules have to follow the kind of rule that we made. I mean, there are many articles, including my own article, that Why did pediatric journal flourish? Because of our wrong rules, that we made it mandatory that every PhD student must publish 2 papers before submitting thesis. Now the quality is bad, so what do? You pay some money, get 2 papers, so to say, and submit a thesis. I need a promotion, I need so many papers. So wherever this kind of quantity of things have happened, that has promoted these unethical behavior. And of course, they have been also promoted by the rush to do something in a faster way, a typical human behavior weakness.
Right. Amazing. So if I put it differently, so the way that, the trajectory of the talk is going, that you started with science as a mission in the pursuit of knowledge, and then over the time it becomes profession. And right now, recently, it becomes a sensation. And for these sensations, people are going gaga and doing whatever they want to do.
It has to be taken as a mission. And that's what I said. Research, good research comes out of passion, not fashion or compulsion. The moment there's a compulsion that you must discover something, as a human nature, we'll do something shortcut. And that's what becomes unethical.
Right. So thank you for answering these. So we have many questions. So due to the shortage of time, I'll be taking few of it. So one question is from Shonak Sahu, who is also part of our team. So he's saying that can trainees like PhD students and postdoc be corresponding author in articles along with their supervisors if they have intellectually contributed to the project?
Yes, there's no rule against it. It's again mutual understanding. And let me share this. As a PhD student, when I was a PhD student in 1960s, I published all papers with myself being corresponding author. And in one paper, before I submitted thesis, I was single author. My supervisor gave me this permission. And this is something that can be given provided the person who is being given this advantage qualifies for it. That's an important part, but there's no rule that no student can be corresponding author. It depends on how much contribution, how much confidence the student has, and how much confidence the supervisor has in the student, that yes, one can handle that. So both parties have to be magnanimous, both parties have to be competent. Rather than fighting it out, it should be a good mutual understanding.
Right. So another question we have from Babul Ram. He's saying that, do you think the publish or perish situation in science prompts researchers to look for shortcuts and follow the unethical practices?
Well, yes, publish or perish has been one of the factors contributing to bad practices. Because as I said, you see, there have been some Nobel laureates who are Nobel laureates, but who have published not more than even 10 papers. So it's not that if I have 400 papers, I'm a great scientist or a great researcher, and if I have 2 papers, I'm a poor researcher. And this is where we have become wrong. Because we started assessing on impact factor and on quantity, number of papers, and which is what publish or perish is. And that thing should be understood, that we do not have such policies. And if we have, we fight it out. That's what my philosophy has been. In my own case, all along my career, spanning now more than nearly 6 decades, half of my papers are in journal published in India. My average impact factor for all my publications put together may not be more than 2. But I'm not dissatisfied with this. I'm happy whatever I contributed, because I think it makes some sense in those studies.
And just to add, if I'm not wrong, your most highly cited publication is published in one Indian journal, I believe.
Yes, in Journal Bioscience.
Right. So that proves, what you were.
You see, when you make this point, I'll also say that in 1980s, we published a lot more papers in Indian Journal of Experimental Biology, published by CSI. In those days, there was no internet. This journal was not on PubMed. PubMed had started that time, or the Web of Knowledge, somewhere in the primitive format there. They were not listed anywhere, but still, data from those papers have been reproduced in good reviews and books. So I have no complaint that, okay, by publishing in Indian journals, your visibility is poor. My common statement there is taking mythological stories that if you say that publishing in Indian journal is not visible to outside, then you are a Gandhari. I hope I mean what you everybody understand Gandhari. The the great name in Mahabharata, the lady who decided to shut her eyes not to see anything. So if we shut our eyes, we will not see anything. Today, no journal, good journal is invisible because Google Scholar, whether it's there on PubMed or whether it's there on Web of Knowledge or Scopus, it's still on Google. I think it's unfortunate that our agencies have made it Scopus or Web of Knowledge only at the criteria. That may not be correct. Again, because these two agencies are private agencies. They do not cover all the journals. Neither does PubMed cover all the journals. Not that only those journals that are covered are good and others are bad. These indexing services also have almost 3 to 5% journals of them are typical predatory journals. They are listed. To my concern, any journal that charges high open access charge of public is a predatory journal. Why should authors pay? Why should readers pay for when we can share our PDF file? But they are given us a wrong impression that we can't share PDF file, which is completely misguided information. And I think we should avoid these payments.
True. I mean, thanks, Professor Lakhotia, for mentioning this. And also to add on, like if you mail him, then you can return. If you mail back, you can see that this what he's saying, that don't pay unnecessarily in the name of open access. Rather, if you have it, just share it. So this is another important point that you make. Thanks a lot for that. So already you mentioned about preprints, and also in this line, I can see one question. And in the interest of time, I cannot take other questions. And so if you have any other questions to ask, just mail Professor Lakhotia. We'll be happy to answer your queries. So the last question what I'll take is Bishwajit Paul is asking, can open science, open data sharing, and archive address issues of ethics in publications? Essentially the preprint services.
Well, you see, ethics have to start from home. I mean, ethics is something that cannot be imposed as such. You see, this is where it differs from law. It has to be a general practice. But yes, open science will definitely make it more transparent, more responsible. Because in preprint archive, for example, that's what many people are now favoring, that instead of pre-publication peer review, we should have post-publication peer review. That you put your things as it is and then let people comment on it. And one important point to remember is, while a published article can be retracted formally, preprint cannot be retracted. It's there and it's there. So if you have done something deliberate error, it will always be there with your name. But if there was an error or you want to improve, yes, preprints can be revised. A revised submission can be made to preprint archive, and you can have first revision, second revision, third revision. Like I have some of my preprints have 2-3 revisions on the preprint archive because they accept revisions. So that's where preprints, I think, are going to have a much better future.
Thanks, Professor Lakhotia, for answering this. I'm sorry to the audience. As I said, in the interest of time, I cannot take more questions here. But thanks again for putting all these questions, and feel free to write to Professor Lakhotia, who would be happy to answer all your questions.
If any question comes in, and if I can answer, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you for letting me have this opportunity of sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Professor Lakhotia, for your time and sharing your insights. And these are some important aspects, but very less talk. So that way, I think our audience has gained a lot of insights regarding academic publishing and so on. So with this, I'll conclude this session. And once again, thanks a lot to Professor Lakhotia for your time. And stay tuned. So we have some exciting events lined up. So do check our websites and follow our Twitter handles to live updates. Thank you. Thanks.
All the best to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.